Hello and welcome to Soul GPS. My name is Eva, and in today's video I wanted to talk to you about something that may help shed light on why it can be so difficult to move forward from narcissistic, toxic relationships. And that reason, let's just call it for what it is guilt, feeling a sense of guilt. Now, guilt is something that is extremely common in, you could say developed, it's a very developed, activated emotion in the people who have been in these toxic relationships, and especially in those people who come from toxic families where at least one family member, oftentimes more than one, have these kinds of personalities where they have dysfunctional way of relating, where they tend to be on the aggressive side, dominating side, and so on. And they use guilt in order to keep status quo and in order to make you behave the way that they want you to behave. That is a systematic process that happens over time. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time, where your boundaries get systematically, gradually eroded, and the sense of guilt is growing within you more and more and more, to the point where it can completely, take over your nervous system. And unless you're walking on tiptoes and everything is copacetic, so to speak, on the surface, you're not rocking the boat, you may be functional, you may be somewhat functional, but the moment you set a boundary or state a request or anything like that, then you're faced with the reaction, and the reaction is designed to evoke guilt in you. And oftentimes it also is accompanied by fear or even terror. Sometimes it can be also accompanied by a sense of obligation. So here we have the acronym from Susan Forward, FOG, FOG, puts you in a state of fog. Fear, obligation, guilt. Can also be shame, and so on and so on. It can be anger. So all of these, although anger tends to evoke shame. When you don't have full access to healthy aggression, instead, little bits of feeling angry can can throw you over into experience of shame, and that can freeze you. That can generate a freeze response in the nervous system, which is also a fascinating topic to talk about. So this fear, the reason why the guilt, the reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I have just recently realized, and I'm like, I gotta talk about this. I realized that the guilt is what blocks grieving. And you need to grieve in order to heal from the relationship. You can't have access to grief, which then, through the process of grieving, will reconnect you with reality and what's true, with truth. You can't do that if you're feeling guilty. And the guilt is what keeps you stuck in fantasy. And fantasy is the domain of the narcissist, and is a key component of trauma bond. So we could say that trauma bond is what keeps us frozen in time. It's a form of trauma, right? It's trauma bond. It stems from trauma, and it creates more trauma. Yeah, and trauma has a freezing quality to it. Keeps us stuck in time, stuck in the past, so we can't be present and we can't really move on into the future. So the trauma bond, we can say, is what prevents us from being in reality. But if we unpack it further, if we go a few levels deeper or a little bit more granular, we can see that it's guilt and shame that keeps us stuck in a fantasy and prevents us from moving into grief, which then will reconnect us with reality. So you see, it's like you have kind of two worlds that are fighting with each other. And I think this just sort of came to me, that this is the origin, is another way to look at cognitive dissonance, because it's fantasy versus reality. The fantasy contains within itself the promise of relief, promise of being delivered from difficulty of life, from pain, from suffering. It's the promise of a better future. Future faking is part of the fantasy that is co-created with a narcissist. Yeah, it's like what I find really fascinating and different from healthy relationships is that in narcissistic relationships, the fantasy world is never quite spoken about. It's assumed. Whereas in healthy relationships, the reality we inhabit with each other is often talked about and described and clarified so we can make good decisions together. Whereas, again, in fantasy, it all sort of happens in this abstract realm. Yeah, it's very subtle realm where a lot of assumptions are made. And who knows, maybe some of the assumptions we're making are false. Maybe even the narcissist looks at it differently. And oftentimes they do, because one of the components of the fantasy that many of us assume is that the narcissist is very much preoccupied with ruminating about us, thinking about us, fantasizing about us, focusing on us, giving us attention, and that's not true. It turns out that narcissists operate in a way kind of like out of sight, out of mind. That's why when they're gone, usually when they leave, when they're no longer with us, we get an instant hit of fear, thinking like we may get betrayed. And likely we're getting betrayed the moment they step out the door. We no longer exist. We're no longer relevant to the extent that we think we are. Whereas we tend to think about it a lot. We ruminate a lot. That's why we're the perfect targets for fantasy generation. We actually create most of that fantasy, right? In our own minds. And again, it's assumed, it's not communicated. Because if you start to communicate those things, then it's like the magic bubble pops. And then you realize that there's not really much there at all. And you may be operating on a completely different level. But there's a fear, again, part of trauma bond, the emotions, right? The emotions are key in recovery. There's a fear that, what if I lose that beautiful vision? What if I lose that future, right? And these things can prevent us from letting go and moving forward. So I wanted to shed light on this because I find a lot of people that I work with to be really stuck in the emotions are keeping them stuck. Oh, let's put it this way: the emotions are keeping them stuck. It's on the emotional level where most of the recovery work needs to be done, and I'm getting really excited about this because this is sort of the new research that I've been diving in and exploring, and I'm seeing great results in my work with my clients when it comes to helping them to unhook themselves. Now this doesn't happen overnight. This is a process, but it's really effective. Is that it's the work that we do from neck down. Yeah, because here's what I've noticed, and I've made video about this, I think not too long ago, why it takes so long to move forward from a narcissistic relationship, is even though we may be conscious of what we stepped into, and with our rational mind see the dynamic. Sometimes it's enough to read a book, just read Psychopath Free, watch a couple of videos, and things start to make sense, and you feel it deep in your gut that you're in a toxic relationship, and your mind totally catches on. But then it's like we can't get unstuck. We can't detach. It can sometimes be a long time before we can finally free ourselves. And of course, I don't mean here all the logistics that are connected with divorcing a narcissist or leaving a narcissistic family. It's so complicated, right? It's a complicated process, especially if you have children and all that. Oh, it's massive. So it does take time and planning. What I'm specifically talking about here is the emotional component. Even after everything is done, we've moved out, we are with our children in our safe haven, but we're still thinking about the narcissist. It's like they still have their hooks in us. It's in the emotions, it's in the trauma bond. And it prevents, the guilt especially prevents us from moving forward into the grieving stage, which will then gradually bring us back into reality. And once you're in reality, then you can start making sound decisions and connect to your authenticity. Yeah? So you can see kind of how it works. I wanted to record this video and sort of draw this, draw a picture, a little bit of like, give it some structure, right? So what do you do? Yeah, I'm sure that's the next question. It's like, okay, well, how do I get there? So again, it's a process. But first of all, I invite you to work with me, because this is something that I work on. But in terms of your self-work, what you need to do is you need to understand, what you need to understand is the concept of building capacity in your nervous system for holding difficult emotions, okay? There's a fear usually around the guilt, around the shame. On top of it, you can see it's like, one emotion is like there's another layer above it and another layer and another. It's like all layered, right? But there's a fear that this emotion will hurt you because it's so heavy, it's so intense. I'm speaking of guilt specifically, that it's end all be all, that it's ultimate truth, that by stating a boundary right now, I'm actually hurting the narcissist, I'm hurting my mother, I'm hurting my sister, I'm hurting my boss or whoever, because of course they're gonna act to make you feel as if you just committed the worst crime. So you're not supposed to say no to them. You're not supposed to set these boundaries because it's inconvenient to them. That's really the reason. It's inconvenient. But the way we receive it is like, we just did something terrible. We're bad people. We must be really terrible people, right? So that guilt, then, if we were to take it a step further, plunges us into the shadow, to use Jungian schematic. The shadow, which is where all of our repressed emotions, feelings, thought about ourselves, the things we don't like ourselves reside. You can sum it up as, you can sum up the shadow as, I'm a terrible person, right? So when we feel guilt, it puts us right at the edge of that, that abyss. I'm a terrible person. So we don't want to go there, right? And we don't want to feel the guilt. So what do? We do what the narcissist wants, and we continue the cycle. So back to the remedy, in a nutshell, what you do is you learn to hold the emotion inside your body and not do anything with it. Don't try to get rid of it. I actually go as far as cranking it up and making it stronger, inviting it in. But that might be, I've been doing it for quite some time, so that might be too much early on. But I crank it up and I just sit and watch. And I watch not only my body, how my body is responding, but I'm also watching what my mind is doing, the somersaults it's doing, the way it's trying to get out of it. But then the mere presence of your awareness is going to do something magical. It's going to do something curative. And that is, it will begin to detach you from the emotion. So you no longer perceive the emotion as you. And when you no longer perceive the emotion as you, but as something that is happening within you, that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, then it doesn't have the power to plunge you into the abyss anymore. Now you're the one with the power. And you can turn it on or off. Or when it comes, you can just let it come in, wash through you, and depart. So that's it in a nutshell. There's, of course, way more to this process. But just become aware, this is why I wanted to record this video, is to make you become aware of the degree in which guilt has power over your life, because it happens so often and it's so incredibly common, and it prevents you from living your full life, from living your authentic life. And all you're concerned about is other people, right? It's again that other orientation, this predominant state where what you think about and what you decide on, what you're concerned with, is the well-being of other people, while forgetting about yourself. It's great to be concerned about the well-being of other people. It's a wonderful quality to have. It's a good thing. There's also this sort of conversation happening out there that we should stop completely, and be only self-centered. That's what the narcissists do. We don't want to do that. But could there be a solution that's in the middle where you're still tuned into your environment, you're still concerned about the well-being of other people, because it's a nice thing to do. It makes you feel good probably too. There's some reward in that as well. Nothing wrong with that. But you're also equally are concerned about your own well-being. And if you are, then you will do this work. And you will learn and give yourself the opportunity to transcend your relationship with your emotions so they no longer have control over you. So that's it for today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your comments. Bye-bye.